Viewer discretion is advised.
It's sad to think that the only thing that is going to save this franchise is the Okay, we're not going to go there, and I don't wish that upon anyone but this guy. But I will say this offseason was so filled with hope. It was to bring in KD, Kyrie, and Zion Williamson. Banners were being printed for both Times Square and the rafters. Instead, Julius Randle and a dick punch so hard you could literally feel it. Couple that with Dolan banning fans, banning legends like Oakley from the Garden, trading the best player the franchise has seen in decades, pissing off Spike Lee, nearly 50 years of torment. That's worse than Patrick Ewing missing a wide open layup. Seriously, the New York Knicks. Did you know there was more than one Madison Square Garden? In fact, there have been like 4 of them. Located on the west side of Manhattan between 49th and 50th Streets, the Garden stood for nearly 40 years, then was demolished in 1968. It was a parking lot for nearly 20 years before becoming Worldwide Plaza, a very, very tall building in Manhattan.
New York Knicks, Patrick Ewing. Ewing beats out Walt Frazier and Willis Reed for the honor here, even though he famously never won a championship. It's tough to ignore how Ewing averaged at least 22 points a game, 10 rebounds a game, and 2 blocks per game for 8 straight years in the 90s. He was the leader of some good but extremely overrated Knicks squads that stunk offensively but were elite defensively and always lost to MJ's Bulls. Ewing had a golden chance to win that elusive ring in 1994 when MJ retired, but in the finals he crapped his pants and ended up losing in 7 games to Hakeem's Rockets. But enough of me being a negative Nancy. Ewing made 11 All-Star games, 7 All-NBA teams, and 1 Rookie of the Year. The guy was really good. Well, until the playoffs. Sorry, I have New York Knicks, Kevin Knox. Knox is a guy who is just really, really bad at everything, which makes you wonder how the hell he was taken 9th overall in 2018 by the Knicks. He would end up lasting 3.5 seasons in the Big Apple before finally being traded to the Hawks. He has shot under 40% in every year of his career, and really the only thing he's good for is the occasional corner 3. But make no mistake, this guy smells. I was honestly skeptical of Knox from day one, as the wrinkles on his forehead looked like lips. This guy can literally blow you a kiss with his forehead. Disgusting. New York Knicks. It's the Knicks.
1999, James Dolan, son of a successful businessman, inherited control of the New York Knicks. The team now under his stewardship had a reputation. In a rough and tumble era of basketball, the Knicks were among the roughest and the tumblest, beloved by the locals and loathed by everyone else. The Knicks had been a perennial runner-up in the dense Eastern Conference, repeatedly falling short of the finals because of the Bulls, Heat, and Pacers. But they were good, and right before Dolan took over, New York experienced an unexpected breakthrough. Jeff Van Gundy's defense still ranked among the best in the league. Cornerstone center Patrick Ewing was aging but still productive when healthy. Allen Houston and Larry Johnson stepped up as Ewing's scoring workload diminished. Charlie Ward was the stalwart point guard. And entering a strange '99 season prefaced by Michael Jordan's retirement and delayed until the end of a lockout, New York GM Ernie Grunfeld made bold moves. He jettisoned 2 '90s icons to bring in some new blood. Marcus Camby, a loping, leaping string bean center entering his prime. Latrell Sprewell, a star scorer getting his career back on track after a long suspension for attacking his coach in Golden State. And Kurt Thomas, a sturdy big man who fit the team's style and attitude perfectly. The compressed '99 season contained plenty of drama. The newcomers took a while to get going, Ewing struggled with an Achilles injury, friction between Grunfeld and Van Gundy contributed to the executive's late season demotion, plus a lingering feeling that the coach might get fired. A regular contender almost missed the playoffs entirely. But something miraculous happened. Even as an 8 seed, even as Ewing gradually succumbed to his injury, the Knicks scrapped out a run to the NBA Finals, upsetting longtime rivals along the way. Only the nascent powerhouse Spurs could stop them. By even reaching the finals, the Knicks rekindled a fire that could illuminate the next decade. After some minor turmoil, New York had plenty of hope that they could transition into a new era of being the usual competent, compelling Knicks. They just had to keep nurturing the new core, thoughtfully managing the old one, and playing the way they all... I can't do this anymore. Let's just get to the bad part. After the finals, the Knicks took their time finding a replacement for Grunfeld, so they did the '99 NBA draft without a general manager. With the 15th pick, New York took French center Frédéric Weiss over beloved local product Ron Artest. Weiss never came to the NBA and would be best known as Vince Carter's pommel horse in the Olympics. New York's roster stood pat as they didn't find a GM until August. They hired Scott Layden, the guy who'd helped build the Utah Jazz into a powerhouse. Things otherwise returned to normal in the '99-2000 season. Dolan quietly took over as chairman. Ewing stayed relatively healthy, at least for the regular season. Houston had his best year yet. The Knicks won 50 games, swept the Raptors in the first round of the playoffs, edged the Heat thanks to Ewing's rousing last-second dunk in Game 7, then, this guy again. Indiana made a big comeback in Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Finals, then Reggie Miller torched the Knicks in Game 6 to deny them another run to the NBA Finals. Not that it would have led to anything anyway. Phil Jackson, once rumored to be gunning for Van Gundy's job, had seized upon something way more fruitful in LA. All told, 50 wins and a roadblock in the Eastern Conference Finals constituted business as usual. But challenges loomed for Layden in the summer of 2000. Ewing, entering the final year of his contract, wanted an extension. And he was in a touchy spot, having heard lots of people suggest the Knicks played better while injuries sidelined him during parts of the last two postseasons. He'd also just had knee surgery, again. Layden was not particularly sensitive to Ewing's touchiness. He wouldn't bite the bullet and let the big man play out his twilight in New York. No extension. So with both parties understanding that another year together was going to be very awkward, the Knicks moved to trade one of the greatest players in franchise history away from the only team he'd ever played for. The Knicks had minimal leverage in trade talks since Ewing was decrepit and other teams knew they were desperate to end an increasingly untenable relationship. In August, New York assembled a gnarly 4-team, 13-player deal, but it fell through when Detroit bailed and found a preferable way to trade Christian Laettner. A month after that embarrassment, the Knicks finally got it done. A 4-team, 12-player deal that included the Sonics, the Lakers, and now the Suns in place of the Pistons. Instead of keeping their homegrown legend happy, the Knicks dumped him for this. The best returning player was guard forward Glenn Rice, a fading star who was kind of redundant with Houston and Sprewell. Rice came with a hefty new contract. So did Luke Longley, who the Knicks knew wasn't healthy enough to play much. Besides those two, the return package was backup center Travis Knight, a bunch of dudes who would never actually play for the Knicks, and some first-round draft picks that Layden didn't even want. He would soon trade them for veterans. Layden's big hope here was that New York would spin around and alleviate the glut of swingmen in a trade for a slightly younger all-star center, Atlanta's Dikembe Mutombo, immediately returning to contention. It didn't happen, and the roster looked pretty weird entering the season. Oh well, onward. The Knicks had a fine enough season. Camby took over for Ewing and played well, though he got suspended a few games for accidentally smacking Van Gundy's face while he was trying to punch Danny Ferry.
It was Jeff Van Gundy who took the punch.
Houston and Sprewell led the way, and the Knicks marched into the 2001 playoffs. But this time, Vince Carter and the Raptors got the better of them, coming back from a 2-1 deficit to eliminate New York in the first round. And then the real fun began. You ready? Layden, ever determined to rejigger instead of rebuild, had traded himself out of the late first round of the 01 draft a couple times. The Knicks missed out on all these youngsters picked around that range. Layden focused on signing Houston, who was very good but well short of elite, for 6 years and $100 million, the largest contract in Knicks history up to that point. Layden dumped Rice after just one season, replacing him with two of his old Jazz guys, Howard Isley and Shandon Anderson, who would also eat up long-term salary. Meanwhile, '99 hero Larry Johnson retired because of back injuries. Despite all that money being spent, the season was a disaster. New York started badly, and even after they rallied a bit, Van Gundy resigned, citing diminished focus. The team was left to assistant coach Don Chaney, who just couldn't get them going. Camby missed 53 games because of injuries. In January, the Knicks suffered one of their worst losses in team history. Come April, they were 30-52. It was New York's first losing season and first missed postseason in over a decade. Time to rebuild cheaply through the draft, right? Of course not, idiot. On draft night 2002, New York held the 7th pick. Layden looked at the players available in that range, a group that included Nene, Amari Stoudemire, and Caron Butler, and said, no thank you, packaging the pick with Camby for Nuggets star Antonio McDyess, who had missed almost all of the prior season after rupturing his patellar tendon. Fans at the draft chanted, "Fire Layden," and that was before McDyess smashed up his patella during an exhibition game and missed the entire 02-03 season. Sprewell, by the way, missed the beginning of that season because he broke his hand on his yacht. He said he slipped and fell on choppy waters. Reports claimed he punched a dude, but he sued the New York Post for saying that. Anyway, the "Fire Layden" chants would return. The Knicks were pretty bad in 03, but not because they were rebuilding. They still paid a ton of salary, so they weren't quite bad enough to finish near the top of the lottery and draft any of these franchise savers. They got Mike Sweetney. A month later, New York dumped Sprewell in a big trade that brought back Keith Van Horn, and they finally got Mutombo, who was at this point about as old as Ewing had been when they traded him. The Knicks started poorly again in 03-04. Fans were getting tired of the bloated, feckless roster Layden had built, especially since McDyess was still out for the first month of his second season in New York. The "Fire Layden" chants continued. Here, for some context, is an early season quote from Knicks superfan Spike Lee. Quote, "We've got the highest payroll in the league, the highest priced tickets in the world, and New York City fans aren't stupid. They're not going for okey doke. They're not going to be hornswoggled or bamboozled, so you got to put a plan in place. I think if you poll most Knicks fans and you tell them, look, let's be honest, we got to rebuild, we got to tear this down and start from scratch, I think most of them would say, fine." Oh, Spike, you're going to love what's coming. In December of 03, the Knicks fired Layden. Dolan's pick to replace him was Isaiah Thomas, the legendary player who had since earned mixed reviews as an executive and coach. Thomas would soon fire Chaney and hire coaching legend Lenny Wilkens, but first he made a big roster move. Isaiah unloaded McDyess, Isley, old 90s regular Charlie Ward, and 2 future first-round picks, one of which would become future All-Star Gordon Hayward, for a return centered around Suns star and New York native Stephon Marbury. Oh, and a past his prime Penny Hardaway. This is where I remind you of Spike Lee's vision of a proper rebuild. The Suns made their end of the trade because they realized they needed to cut salary and start small. They were bad, but they had young guys they'd acquired by using their draft picks, and now they had space to sign Steve Nash over the summer. Phoenix became the best team in the NBA the following season. The Knicks under Thomas, still not rebuilding. They now had no 2004 first-round draft pick and no cap space, but they did have Marbury's big old contract alongside that of Houston, who, by the way, missed a bunch of that season and the next one because of knee problems. New York remained bad, but not all the way bad. They slipped into the playoffs in 04, and the Nets swept them in the first round. Despite acquiring Jamal Crawford to spell the injured Houston, or I guess maybe because of that, the Knicks were worse the following year. They started the season fine, propelled by the man who declared himself the best point guard in the NBA, but he and they fell off hard as 2004 turned to 2005. Those Knicks lost enough that Wilkins resigned as coach. They lost enough to fall back out of the playoffs, but they were still shelling out the biggest payroll in the entire NBA, so they didn't lose quite enough to get, say, one of these guys in the 05 draft. They got Channing Frye. And I think we should give Isaiah partial credit here, because the Knicks also had the 30th pick and grabbed David Lee, who was pretty good. And by trading away Kurt Thomas, they got to pick Nate Robinson. 2 nice selections. And Isaiah had recently gotten Trevor Ariza as a second-round pick. He was decent at drafting, which is why what's about to happen still makes me want to swallow my own eyeballs. Summer 2005. To replace the coaching legend who bailed, Isaiah Thomas recruited another, Larry Brown, a New Yorker and a recent champion with the Detroit Pistons. Sure, fine. Then the Knicks signed Jerome James. Just months prior with the Sonics, the 29-year-old journeyman center had enjoyed a breakout playoff series against his former employer, the Sacramento Kings. After defeating the team that once cut him and gave him a garbage bag to clean out his locker, James wore one like a cape. It was fun, even though James more or less went back to being Jerome James for the rest of the playoffs, which is to say, okay at best. The Knicks, having traded away all their centers, gave James a 5-year contract. Okay. And Isaiah wanted another big man. he swung a trade centered around Bulls youngster Eddie Curry. Getting Curry required giving up a few players and first-round picks in 06 and 07, which, and sorry for all the spoilers, would eventually be used to select future All-Stars, LaMarcus Aldridge and Joakim Noah. Oh, and in case that wasn't enough to remind you of Scott Layden, the NBA included in its new 2005 collective bargaining agreement an amnesty clause known colloquially as the Allen Houston Rule. It allowed teams to cut one player's contract without it counting against the salary cap. The Knicks did not use it to get rid of the expensive and washed-up Houston, which was pretty funny, but he retired anyway before the season started. There went the last remnant of that time the Knicks were good, which was just 6 years prior but felt like an eternity ago. Anyhow, Larry Brown's 05-06 Knicks were pungent butt trash. Even though they had the highest salary in the league, even though they traded for Steve Francis, a once All-Star and near replica of Marbury. Curry and James didn't work together at all, which only mattered a little because James was often too unprepared or injured to play. Brown and Marbury had a very public, very petty feud while the team racked up losses, 59 of them. And Brown loathed Thomas's management, sometimes undercutting his boss by reaching out to opposing teams about potential transactions. As the season wound down, everyone agreed Brown's relatively new job was doomed. He called himself a dead man walking. And indeed, come June, Thomas fired Brown and replaced him with himself. Isaiah's dual role came with what seemed like a stern warning. Dolan wanted to see evident progress or he wouldn't keep Thomas around. New York did improve, which isn't hard to do when you won only 23 games last year, but that season was marred by an ugly brawl at the Garden and by an eventual collapse that kept the 33-win Knicks out of the postseason for the third year in a row. It was marred further by an ongoing lawsuit in which a former Madison Square Garden employee, Anucha Brown Sanders, claimed Thomas sexually harassed her, then fired her when she issued complaints. None of this seemed to count against Thomas's evident progress. Before the 2007 season even ended, Dolan gave Isaiah an extension. Dolan and MSG soon became defendants in the lawsuit, were found liable for the harassment along with Thomas, and eventually had to pay Brown Sanders over $11 million in a settlement. It was around this time that NBA Commissioner David Stern deemed Dolan's Knicks not a model of intelligent management. And nothing's changed there. The decade since the lawsuit has been marked by childish quarrels, embarrassing outbursts, and horribly misplaced trust, and we're not even talking about Dolan's businesses outside of the Knicks. The only thing, the one thing James Dolan has going for him as a franchise owner is that he possesses an obscene amount of money and is willing to spend it. Anyhow, back to basketball. In the summer of 07, Isaiah the GM made a trade for Zach Randolph. Marbury was thrilled.
Did y'all see we got Zach Randolph? Did anybody see that?
Yes, sir.
You see the move Isaiah pulled off?
Yes, sir.
Isaiah, the coach, watched his team struggle in their first few games and considered benching Marbury behind young Marty Collins, which infuriated Marbury and sparked an actual fight between star and coach on the team plane. Don't worry, Marty, it's not your fault. You have nothing to do with this. Marbury left the team for a bit, and things improved when he returned. Just kidding. In late November, the Knicks played their first nationally televised game in years and lost to the Celtics by 45 points. Curry struggled to mesh with Randolph and was eventually benched. Chants of "Fire Isaiah" filled the Garden, and I just want to say, Knicks fans deserve credit for always finding a way to work the names of disgraced coaches and executives into that exact cadence. Finally, in April 2008, Donnie Walsh replaced Thomas as Knicks president. At the end of a 23-59 season, Walsh fired Thomas as coach. That is the end of the collapse of the Knicks, I would say. What's happened since feels more like a loop, a cycle of hope and letdown. Hope and letdown. Hope, letdown. Hope, letdown. Hope, letdown. Hope, letdown. Hope, letdown. The only thing more consistent than that vicious cycle is Dolan's ownership. No matter how much the Knicks suck, the gazillionaire in charge has never met a disincentive strong enough to consider selling the team or at least put power in the hands of someone with the vision to right the ship. Probably because the Knicks keep making him money. Through their worst years, they consistently ranked among the most valuable franchises in all of sports. And why is that? Part of it must be the good fortune of occupying the New York market. Another part of it is that dipshits like me keep caring about them.